my presentation will be primarily, I'll be speaking on the context of a larger definition for fishery, where people will be part of that habitat as well as resource. And this is the way in which we need to actually address the larger perspective of climate change as well. So I'll be speaking about the myth of resource abundance in India. We always see that the resources are abundant in the in India, and also impact and vulnerability, adaptation and maladaptation, and then how will we move forward. Now, if you look at this graph, which of course is a recent work by an Australian girl, and who has actually plotted the marine fish landing in India. But what we can see is that in the last 10 years, last 1 decade, the marine fishery is actually now in a plateau. And then if you look at the general increase in the marine productivity, we should understand that if you look at the artisanal fisheries here, as you can see here, the artisanal fishery is already coming down. At the same time, the total increase in the marine fishery in India is primarily because of the more industrial and multi-day trawling, and that too the contribution of the bycatch, if you say the total enhancement in fishery. And also, if you specifically come to the southern part of Kerala, which Kerala, which was once the leader in marine fish landing, you can see that in the last 2 decades, there is actually a coming down, or there's a decline in the total marine fish landing within the state. And also, if you look at the way in which the trend in marine fishing production in Kerala happens in the last 10 years, then you can see that overall there is a gradual decline in the fishery resources. And also, if you look at it is not directly connected with climate change, but if you can see, it's connected with the overharvesting of the resources. And there are some specific groups of fishes in the west coast of India which may probably go locally extinct, which include the Indian turbot Setoda cerumi, which is available in the east coast of India, but not in the west coast, and also some species of catfishes, which are there in the west coast. And also, then let us see what are the issues connected with that, besides climate change or along with climate change. And it's already explained by Professor Asa that there is overcapacity of crafts. And this is a major issue, especially the mechanized vessels. And then you can see that there is an issue of overexploitation, especially with regard to the juvenile fishery, and a series of coastal developmental activity, which of course drive the traditional fishermen out of their normal habitats. And there is an issue of pollution, and then comes the issue of climate change. So my request is that the climate change alone cannot be considered together when you address an issue of resource availability in Indian coastal regions. Another issue is actually the coastal developmental activities, and most of the developmental activities come where the artisanal fishermen are actually based or find their livelihood, and this is a serious issue to deal with. And also, the upstream, whatever happens in the upstream areas in the west coast of India, particularly with regard to the river and their discharge into the ocean, especially in the coastal ocean, that also impact the availability of the resources, especially the disappearance of mudbank fishery along the Kerala coast can be considered as one of the implications of the reduction in the river inputs into the coastal waters. And this is the status of the shore erosion all along the Indian coast, and this is a serious issue to address, particularly when we look at the emerging issue of sea level rise and the increase in the natural hazards along the coastal areas. And also, the way in which the resources are exploited, particularly in some part of India, where the gap between the ecosystems, the backwaters, and the coastal waters are getting reduced year after year. And another issue which Professor Ash also mentioned is about the mangroves. And in the west coast, this is a considerable decline in the amount of mangroves available all along the all the states across these west coast. And also, there are a larger number of maladaptation practices. For example, if you have a large number of natural solutions along the Kerala Kerala coast, or for that matter, all along, it's right from the Gujarat till Kerala in the west coast, you can see that there are large number of areas where there is maladaptation than the adaptation, and ultimately this kind of maladaptation practices will the disadvantaged groups are almost are primarily the traditional fishers along this area. And another contribution of the climate change is the increasing the eutrophication all along the coastal waters, both in the east and west coast. It's more prominent in the west coast of India, primarily the harmful algal blooms along the Kerala coast and their impact on the fishery resources per se. And there are opportunistic species like the jellyfish, which are now blooming in abundance all along the Indian coast. Especially, we have studied that all along the west coast of India. And some of the species again, which I would call opportunistic species, like the triggerfish, which are increasing in population along the west coast of India. Reasons cannot be attributed to the climate change, but the reasons can be attributed to change in the in the fish availability, predator fish availability, etc., along this region. And in the estuarine belts all along the west coast, we also recorded the invasion of the charu mussel, which is from the South American countries in the west coast of India, especially in the estuaries, which form a bed over the clams and over the green mussel, which was abundant in the estuarine resources. Another issue along this. And when we specifically discuss climate change impact on the fishermen as well as fishery, and I would say three impacts in general. One is actually the way in which the ecology is changing, particularly in terms of the yield, in terms of species distribution pattern, in terms of the catches, changes in the seasonality of production, which we will discuss in the coming slides. And if you look at the direct impact, which is not discussed in detail, for example, what is actually the as a result of the natural increase in the natural hazards, what is actually the percentage of damages to the gears? It may break up very easily because the sea is changing, and increased risk at the sea, and increased risk of the health of the fishermen, and also flooding the fishing communities and their landscapes. And this is another issue. And when you look at the socio-economic impacts, there is influx of migration of fisheries, and then there are local conflicts, which we will discuss. Increasing the fuel costs, reduced health of the fishermen, relative profitability of other sectors, resource available for management, reduced security, and also the funds for adaptation. So that means this is a holistic. When you look at the climate change impact on the fishery sector in general, the impacts are there on the ecology, and there are direct impacts on the fishing gear as well as craft, and also socio-economic impacts. And these are some of the things which we need to discuss further, and also in different sectors. I'm not going into the details of that because of the scarcity of time. And one of the resources definitely in the west coast of India, which is going down, is the sardine resources. And there are northward migration as well as eastward migration of the resources. And everything cannot be attributed to the climate change. There are multiple issues, and one, there is of course the issue of overfishing of the juveniles, which I am seeing I have recorded in the east coast and west coast of India. And second, of course, is the impact of climate change and El Nino, which impacted the resource. And third is actually the development of oxygen minimum zones all along the Indian Ocean, which also contributed to that. And then recently the oil sardine from the west coast, they are migrating to the east coast. You can see up to the Andhra Pradesh and Odisha, and there the percentage of catches in all these areas are changing, and the fishermen started using the gill nets to catch oil sardine. And so the question is, does the resource depletion in the west coast of India supported the fishery in the east coast and vice versa, and what are the impacts therein? And some of the species like Indian mackerel, they're moving down into the cooler waters. So they started appearing in larger abundance in the trawl catches. And also, if you look at the reproductive patterns of species, very common species like Nemipterus, which of course has changed the reproductive patterns. And already it's informed about the coral bleaching that's happening in the islands of India, and as well as the Gulf of Mannar, which impact definitely in the long run availability of the many of the commercially valuable species. So the issue, what are the signs of unsustainability in the marine fishery sector at the ecosystem level? And one, already the marine fisheries is reaching the plateau. And there is an issue of fishing down the food web, because topmost predators are gone in large numbers. So we are catching primarily the secondary, the herbivores and the secondary carnivores. And then there is overcapacity and in the open access fishery, and increase in the juvenile fishery. And we are now developing a hypothesis of fishing for the bycatch. Many of the fishermen, especially the commercial trawlers, they are fishing for the bycatch because there's a large demand from the fish feed manufacturing companies, and as a result, there is a larger exploitation of fisheries, which ultimately will impact the small scale fishery. And then there is the deep sea fishing policy. We have not yet arrived at a consensus, and there is decline in the predatory species, and there is increase in the opportunistic species. So all these things together determine the issues here. And there are other issues also, which I have already discussed, and we don't have a marine spatial planning in India. And what are the things to do for future? Definitely, there should be a more awareness on really what happens with the climate change, and particularly in the capacity building of the fishing community and the coastal community. And also, we need to develop the manpower, particularly with the local communities, who can speak about the climate change and the real issues involved from the fisherman perspective. So a better combination of fishers' perspective on adaptation and sustainable fishery should be there, which is not happening at present. And everything comes from top, and there's a top-down approach as of now. And also, we need to address the transboundary use of resource, and also we need a Swadeshi, the deep sea fishing policy, and evolving common platforms and sharing the best practices and awareness for adaptation for the coastal communities. And the final question is whether the coastal communities are really represented in policy making, and that, of course, is not happening ultimately. And my final slide is actually to address the issue of blue growth and blue justice, and which is again a topic to discuss in India when we discuss about climate change. And also the government is spending a lot of money, investing a lot of money to support blue economy, and whether the growth is supported with the justice. And this is something which probably we need to address in future as well. So there is a demand for the greening the blue, and especially the investment challenges. And there is actually there should be a drive to reduce the subsidies for the industrial fishing unit in India, as well as and also develop better data on the impacts of climate change on the blue economy in per se. If you go away with the original definition of blue economy, this is all about the sustainability. But the government is actually promoting a new scenario of capital investment to support the blue economy. This is an entirely different perspective. And also, there is a stronger belief in the international platform that there is a limit to blue growth. And that also we need to address, as well as there should be a series of discussions on what exactly is limit to blue growth, or we should actually speak about a degrowth as far as blue development in India is concerned. Okay. And this is a very interesting publication by Daniel Pauly, my friend, and also a global leader who advocate for this. And he considered that sustainable fishery is one of the solutions for supporting and sustaining blue economy. And that is the reason why we should have a larger perspective when we think about climate change, sustainability, and blue economy. And this is the pillar for this kind of a development. And government definitely has a managerial role, but there should be an involvement of civil society, and there should be an involvement of community, and also there should be an involvement of the private sector. And community, industry, partnership, and collaboration is actually the way in which we need to look at blue economy, especially when we address blue economy as an issue of sustainability. Thank you.